Hello, and welcome to the 2019 Transitional Housing Assistance Grants for victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. I would love to tell you a bit about myself. I am your presenter. My name is Sarita Gibbons. I am the owner for Comprehensive Grants Management. Comprehensive Grants Management has been providing successful grant writing services over the last 12 years with an average 65% grant writing success rate. My hobbies are reading, painting, gardening, and playing the keyboard. I have provided our URL. You can visit our company website. You will see our staff or grant writing staff and a little bit about each staff member. You will be able to read blogs. We have vlogs, articles, and an assortment of information there for you. Most importantly, we have an endless list of grant awards that we have won for our clients who are across the United States of America. The purpose of this webcast is to perform an overview of the 2019 Transitional Housing Assistance Grants for victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. And this grant is issued by the Office of Violence Against Women of the U.S. Department of Justice. I've also provided a URL for you, which is additional grant application information assistance. The purpose of this grant, the Transitional Housing Assistance Grants for victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking, is to provide 6 to 24 months of transitional housing and supportive services for victims who are homeless or in need of transitional housing as a result of a situation of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking. And for those whom emergency shelter services or other crisis intervention services are unavailable. The grant due date for the Transitional Housing Assistance Grant is February the 13th, 2019 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Eligible applicants for this grant program are states, units of local government like cities, villages, towns, and Indian government or tribal organizations. Also, other organizations such as nonprofits can apply who has an expertise in sexual assault and domestic violence. They can also be community-based and culturally specific organizations that have a documented history of effective work concerning sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking. So if you have a nonprofit organization that has documented history of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking, and helping the participants in such a program, you are eligible to apply for this grant. If you are an eligible applicant for this grant and the purposes of this grant is within your core focus areas based on the specialty that your organization operates services, then you can apply for this grant. And if you need grant writing assistance, our firm, the Comprehensive Grants Management, will be most happy to assist you with this grant. So you can give us a call at 813-949-2877, or you can send us an email at grants@comprehensivegrants.com and just let us know that you saw our webcast and you're interested in the Transitional Housing Assistance Grant Program, and we will get started on your grant application right away. Remember, our grant writing success rate is an average of 65%, and we would be most happy to work with your organization. This grant program has a few program activities that you can use the grant funding for. The grant funds under this program must be used for one or more of the following purposes. So the first purpose is to provide transitional housing. The second purpose is to provide short-term housing assistance. And the third purpose is to provide supportive services. So transitional housing, including funding for the operating expenses of newly developed or existing transitional housing. So this is really good because if you're just getting started with your transitional housing, this grant program will provide you funding to do so as long as you submit a strong grant application and get funded from the funding agency. The second activity is short-term housing assistance. This includes rental of utility, payments, and assistance relating to expenses such as payment of security deposits and other costs that's incidental to relocation to or from transitional housing. The third activity is supportive services. So supportive services is designed to enable a minor, an adult, or a dependent of such minor or adult who is fleeing a situation of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking. And this supportive services would include to locate and secure permanent housing. So permanent housing can include public housing, Section 8 housing, or private market rental housing, or even home ownership. Also, supportive services can also include to secure employment, including obtaining employment counseling, occupational training, job retention counseling, and counseling concerning reentry into the workforce. And also, supportive services can be used to integrate into the community by providing that minor, that adult, or dependent with services such as transportation, counseling, childcare services, case management, and other assistance. It's important to note that participation in the supportive services shall be voluntary. So any participant in this actual program is not necessarily forced to utilize any of these supportive services, such as finding a job. So these are the program activities. They are really good program activities. They cover a wide spectrum, especially the supportive services, and almost all nonprofits who provide supportive service assistance can apply for this grant, as long as they integrate the core purpose of the grant program, which is to serve victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. It is grant writing secret to let you know that you should always propose to address priority areas so that your applications can be treated special in the funding consideration. So if the funding agency tells you in the grant announcement that if you propose a certain activity or if you serve a certain number of participants or percentage of participants or serve a certain area, you will be given special consideration. You always want to make sure that you do that. So for this particular grant, the funding agency has 3 priority areas. So applications proposing activities in the following areas will be given additional points and or special consideration as indicated below during the review process. So if you want to be given additional points, or if you want your grant application to be given special consideration resulting in grant funding, you want to make sure that you incorporate these priority areas in your grant application. So the first is to increase the response to victims of human trafficking. The second is to include substance abuse professionals in a coordinated community response to VAWA crimes and increase victim access to substance abuse services. The third is to address the unique risks and challenges faced by veterans who are homeless and in need of transitional housing assistance as a result of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. So I cannot stress to you enough that you must incorporate these priority areas in your grant application. The period of performance for this grant has an estimated project start date of October the 1st, 2019, and it has an estimated project end date of September the 30th, 2022. So this is a 3-year grant. It's a 36-month grant period of performance. I am always happy to do webcasts on grant funding that has a very high number of estimated awarded applicants, and this is one of those grants. So the funding agency stated that the estimated number of awarded applicants will be 70, and that is really good because what that means is that you have a very good chance of winning one of these grant awards if you submit a very strong grant application package on time to the funding agency. I am happy to report that there is no match or cost share requirement for this grant program. So the additional burden of securing a match, whether it's in-kind or a cash match, is not a responsibility for the applicants in this grant program. So again, I'm very happy to report that there is no match or cost share requirement. The funding agency stated that they will make awards under this program as follows. Awards for up to $450,000 for the entire 36 months to successful applicants proposing to use Transitional Housing Program Fund grants for both housing support and supportive services. So up to $450,000 if you are proposing housing services and supportive services. You can request up to $300,000 if you are proposing to use the grant funds for supportive services or housing only. Also, the Office of Violence Against Women will prioritize up to 4 projects that demonstrate a knowledge, comprehensive approach in serving victims of assault who are also victims of sex trafficking and make awards of up to $500,000. So please note that applications proposing this priority area should submit budgets for 36 months. An additional 36 months of funding may be awarded non-competitively. Any future supplemental awards will be based on a number of factors, including but not limited to available appropriation and grantee performance. The funding agency has given us categories of expense that you can use to create your budget request to submit a concise, justifiable, and reasonable budget request to the funding agency. So these are the categories of expense, which includes personnel, that is your staff salaries. So the people that you will need to successfully manage and operate this grant program, you can allocate a portion of the grant fund to pay for either their part-time salaries or full-time salaries. Also, you can allocate grant funding for fringe benefits. You can allocate grant funding for travel expenses, and this will include long distance travel or short distance travel. You can also allocate a portion of the grant funding for equipment costs and any equipment that you deem necessary to assist you to successfully manage and operate this grant program. You can allocate funding for it out of the grant budget. Supplies, you can also allocate grant funding for supplies, as well as contractual expenses. Contractual expenses can be your community partners. So if there's an aspect of this grant program that is better suited for another community partner to administer this portion of the grant or activity of the grant for you, this is a way that you can compensate your community partners for the services that they provide to you. So you can portion a bit out of the grant funding under contractual to pay a contractor or community partner for a service or activity that they're better suited to perform for you under this grant program. So you can outsource that aspect of the grant program to that third party. Also, other expenses that you deem necessary to successfully operate this grant program, as long as it's an eligible expense, you can appropriate a portion of your grant request in your budget. Direct costs that you deem necessary, if it is an eligible expense, you can allocate a portion of your grant request for this direct cost. Indirect costs. Indirect costs can be considered in two ways. If you have a federally negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, you can allocate that portion, that percentage that is within your indirect cost rate agreement for your indirect cost rate. And you can allocate that portion towards indirect costs in your grant budget request. If you do not already have an indirect cost rate agreement, you can allocate the statutory limit, which is up to 10%, which is up to 10% de minimis indirect costs. So these are your categories of expenses that the funding agency has given to you. So again, make sure that your budget request is reasonable, justifiable to operate a grant with these purpose areas and activities, and that you keep your budget concise. The funding agency did provide some funding limitations, and funding limitations are good for you to definitely be aware of because you do not want to propose activities that are ineligible for your grant program. And these are the listed funding limitations. So unallowable costs are lobbying. Do not use your grant funding request to allocate a portion of the grant towards lobbying. Neither fundraising. Also the purchase of real property. Also physical modifications to buildings, including minor renovations such as painting or carpenting. You do not want to allocate any portions of your grant funding request to these expenses. Construction, the funding agency does not want you to use your grant funding on construction. Payment of mortgage, property taxes or other expense that would prevent foreclosure or eviction. Also, payment of bills, utilities that are in arrears. If you're paying for regular utilities, which are within the months of the period of performance, that will be okay. But the payment of bills and utilities that are in arrears, the funding agency does not want you to use the grant funding for that. Drugs or alcohol testing, using federal funds for saving accounts for survivors. Also, food and beverage costs for refreshments and meals. Also, conference planning and expenditure limitations, and program assessment and pre-agreement cost approval. So these are your funding limitations. Please endeavor to not include these costs in your budget requests. Eligible participants for this grant program will include victims of sexual assault, victims of domestic violence, victims of dating violence, victims of stalking, homeless victims, victims unable to get emergency shelter services or other crisis intervention services, victims of human trafficking, victims of substance abuse, homeless veterans who are victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking. So if you currently serve these participants and the purpose of this grant is also something that you do, you can definitely apply for this grant. You're an eligible applicant. A very inspiring word of advice is don't be ashamed of your story. It will inspire others, and it's anonymous, but it really captures the essence of what this grant program is all about. It's decision time, and I will be happy to ask you some questions to help you to determine if you would like to apply for this grant program. So the first question is, are you eligible for this grant? If you are an eligible applicant, then you're eligible for this grant. Do you have a need for this grant? That is a good question that you must ask yourself and make an assessment if you have a need for this grant. Do you want to apply for this grant? Well, the grant due date is February the 13th, 2019, and we have a little bit over a month now to apply for this grant. So you must decide if this is a grant that you would like to apply for. And if you have answered yes to these questions, then congratulations, because that means that you are one step closer to applying for and possibly receiving a grant award of up to $500,000. If you have decided to apply for this grant, then that is really good news. If you have decided to apply for this grant in-house, please drop us a line and let us know how this webcast did help you. Did you learn some new information that you did not know? So that would be so wonderful to gain some feedback on our webcast, and that will help us to prepare additional webcasts for you in the future. If you do not want to do this grant yourself in-house, well, that is why Comprehensive Grants Management exists. We are a full-time, full-year grant writing firm that assists companies nationwide, especially nonprofits, to apply for their grant programs. We have a 65% average grant writing success rate, and we would be so happy to work with your organization. So please give us a call at 813-949-2877, and we would love to get started on your grant application. You can also send us an email at grants@comprehensivegrants.com. Drop us an email and let us know that you would want to apply for the Transitional Housing Assistance Grants for victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating, violence, and stalking. And we will get started right away. So remember that the grant due date is February the 13th, 2019. So if that name of the grant is too long for you to remember, just give us a call or drop us a line and let us know that you would like to apply for the Transitional Housing Grant, and that will be good enough for us to get started. So thank you so very much for your time. It was a pleasure to present this webcast to you, and I look forward to presenting my next webcast to you. Thank you again for your time.